Okay, so when we start the sketch, remember we want to be looking most of the time at our image, and then just like 40 to 50% of the time at our paper. I'm going to orient my sketchbook in a landscape position, and I'm going to start with and we'll all kind of work from the same image mostly, but I'm going to look at the start of the octopus head, and I'm going to notice how much of the paper it takes up, and I can do that by measuring with my pencil. It takes up about half of my paper. I'll try to draw a little darker so that you guys can see. I also want to compare how high the different arms come up to the top of the octopus. And if something overlaps something else, I want to make sure that I stop drawing that when the overlap starts. Now I realize here my first mistake, I made that arm get thicker, so I'm just going to correct that really quick because we want to work on looking at what we're drawing and making that look a little thinner. And then I can also, you'll see that these kind of split because you see the underside of them as well, and that gives a little more dimensionality to what you're drawing. So just remember to draw what you see, not what you think you see, which can be a little bit tricky. So here I just see, and you'll see what I'm talking about when you get your image, but here we've got a little hook, and then it comes around the other side because we no longer see the top of this tentacle. We move to the back side of the tentacle. So here, when I continue it, I skip under this guy, and then I can see that from here, my next tentacle comes out and around. It comes to a point, smaller to wider, and then it intersects with another arm here. So I'm going to stop and just compare my points. Again, looking at where these different points come compared to each other. And this arm's kind of tricky because it runs into itself. So I'm actually going to do a little erasing here because so then I have all my arms in place, and I can go and I can do those secondary lines that kind of disappear, those shadow lines. And one thing with tentacles, when you guys put tentacles on your octopus, just make sure you don't exaggerate them, and make sure that you get some of them going off of the area that you see, if that's what you see in the drawing. And keep in mind that this image that I'm going to give you guys is a sketch. So it's not the real animal, but you can tell that they did this sketch from a live animal. So just make sure if you make up the image that you know that maybe you learned in school or learned how to draw from, a book of an octopus, you might come up with something, that's kind of like, oh, look, it's got it's got 8 legs, so it must be an octopus. I'm done with my sketch. I want to see evidence which there are really cute little octopus that look like that, but we want to we're practicing these long limbs because a lot of the mistakes that I've seen with trees so far have been really short, stubby limbs, and we want to make sure that when we do these trees, we are making our limbs larger to smaller, and we want to make sure that that they're long, and that we want to think that they make sense in physics, because if the branches are all as thick as the trunk and they're all coming off of the trunk, that tree isn't going to work. The branches aren't going to bend with the wind. They're not going to be, thin enough to survive a storm. So, keeping in mind that our next step is going to be a watercolor step that has to dry for a while. You could do this part first and then do your octopus sketch, but we do have a long class hour today. That's why I'm kind of giving you two things to work on, so you have something to work on while this dries. We're going to do our background, and we're going to do our sky and the ground part of this, yes. Okay, we'll get you set up, don't worry. I put out different brushes here, so just put these ones back. I put these out because they're larger, and the step that we're going to do today is just getting in our background. Now keep in mind you want to paint over this background, okay? So, watercolor painting, the kind that you guys saw of my finished project, is at least 5 layers. So if we don't start with a really light first layer, we're going to have a really hard time painting over that. So we want to think about a layer that is mostly water. You want to have a piece of paper with that you can kind of test out the waters on to see if somebody dipped your brush in black paint yesterday, or to see how dark that color comes out. And I see right now I have a really nice light color. So I'm going to do what's called wet in wet painting for the background. So that means I'm going to cover my background over my tape with a light layer of water, but I have to move quickly because I don't want it to dry before I get my paint in. Now I want to think of a nice sunny background, so I'm just going to put a light coat of yellow. I want to think of it almost kind of like sparkling through. I'm going to get that yellow on. I might get a teeny bit of orange, so I'm doing wet paint into wet water. That's where the wet and wet comes in. Do you think I want so much water that it warps my paper and makes big puddles? No. Okay, I want enough to keep, you can see the sheen of the water. It's enough to keep my paints moving. I'm adding a little orange now to this sunset or sunrise. And then towards the bottom, I might go ahead and get just a teeny bit of blue to put in there. But you'll see why I'm giving you 2 projects, because I don't want to overwork this. When you overwork watercolor projects, your paper will start to kind of pill. And if any of you guys have had a sweater pill, you know, it's where you get those little fabric-y balls that pull off. It's kind of the same thing with your watercolor paper. So you guys might not be able to see the yellow and the blue all the way in the background of this, but you can kind of see, I can see it here, which is what matters. And then on the ground, I'm going to clean my brush off. I'm going to do more wet paint, and I'm going to put in maybe a little green and yellow, but remember, these colors, maybe even a little blue, I want to keep really light for my background. So maybe even a little brown on the background, but try to keep your colors clean and simple for this background layer, okay? This really shouldn't take a long time, maybe a minute or 2, and if you want, you can even tilt your paper a little bit to get a different blend. Then I'm going to set my paper aside, and I'm just going to let it dry, either in my drawer or on my desk, and then I can go ahead and move on to that octopus sketch that I did first. Okay, and I'll give you guys the paper for that.